Most people believe timing is something you can measure. They think the right message arrives when your life is calm enough to understand it. When you have solved the problem, made the decision, or finally found the courage to begin again. I used to believe that too. Then I noticed something strange. The words that change us rarely arrive when we feel ready. They arrive when we are quietly exhausted from pretending we do not need them. They find us in that private space between holding everything together and admitting that something inside us has begun to ache. And I don't think you found this message because everything is going well. I think it reached you because you have been carrying something you have not fully explained even to yourself. Maybe nothing dramatic happened today. You answered people normally. You handled what needed to be handled. You smiled when the moment required it. If someone asked whether you were okay, you probably gave them an answer that sounded believable. But beneath all of that, something has felt different. Not broken, not hopeless. Just tired in a way that sleep has not been able to repair. I noticed something about you. You have become very skilled at functioning while emotionally standing somewhere else. Your body completes the day, but your mind keeps returning to a conversation, a person, a decision, or a version of yourself you are afraid you may have lost. You are present, but part of you is always listening for something. An apology, perhaps. An explanation. A sign that you did not misunderstand everything. Or maybe you are waiting for permission to stop carrying a burden that was never entirely yours. That is why this arrived now. Not because some invisible force scheduled these exact words for this exact minute. Perhaps the truth is even more personal than that. Perhaps you are finally able to recognize what you once had to ignore. There is a difference between hearing something and being ready to let it touch you. You have heard comforting words before. People have told you to stay strong, think positively, move on, give it time. They may have meant well, but their words could not reach the place that was hurting because they spoke to your situation without understanding your experience. They saw what happened. They did not see what had changed inside you. They did not see how carefully you began reading people after someone made you question your instincts. They did not notice how you started preparing for disappointment, even during beautiful moments. They did not understand why kindness sometimes makes you suspicious, or why silence from someone you love can make your entire body feel alert. That is not because you are too sensitive. It is because the heart remembers uncertainty differently from the mind. Your mind may say, "It was only one conversation." Your body remembers the waiting. Your mind may say, "They were probably busy." Your body remembers all the other times affection disappeared without explanation. Your mind may say, "I should be over this by now." But some part of you is still standing in the original moment, trying to understand how something that once felt safe became unfamiliar so quickly. I think you have felt this too. Sometimes the smallest event carries the weight of every similar event that came before it. A delayed reply is not merely a delayed reply. A change in someone's tone is not merely a change in tone. A door closing gently can somehow sound like every door that was ever closed on you. This is how memory protects us. It connects the present to the past before we consciously understand what it is doing. It whispers, "Pay attention. You have felt this before." But protection has a cost. When you have been disappointed enough times, you stop waiting for clear evidence that something is wrong. You begin responding to possibility. You notice distance before anyone admits they are pulling away. You sense emotional weather changing before the first drop of rain. People may call that overthinking. Sometimes it is. But sometimes it is the intelligence you developed in places where honesty arrived late. Something about your journey stood out to me. You do not fear being alone as much as you fear feeling alone beside someone who claims to love you. Those are not the same loneliness. Being physically alone can be quiet. It can even become peaceful. But feeling alone in the presence of someone you trust creates a different kind of emptiness. It makes you question whether your needs are unreasonable. It teaches you to reduce yourself gradually, to ask for less, mention less, reveal less, until the relationship appears peaceful because your truth has gone silent. And you have probably called that maturity at least once. You told yourself you were choosing your battles. You were being understanding. You were giving them space. You were refusing to create unnecessary conflict. But deep down, you knew you were doing something else. You were trying to remain lovable by becoming easier to neglect. That sentence may feel uncomfortable. Stay with it for a moment. You were not weak. You were adapting, You learned that expressing pain could create more distance, so you made your pain quieter. You learned that asking direct questions could lead to defensiveness, so you began studying behavior instead. You learned that needing reassurance might be called insecurity, so you attempted to reassure yourself while quietly wondering why love made you feel so unsafe. This pattern does not begin with a lack of self-respect. It often begins with hope. You see what a connection could become. You remember who someone was at the beginning. You notice their wounds and understand the reasons behind their behavior. Because you are capable of seeing complexity, you hesitate to make simple judgments. That compassion is one of your most beautiful qualities. It is also where you sometimes abandon yourself. You offer context for behavior that continues to hurt you. You translate silence into stress, inconsistency into confusion, and emotional absence into a difficult season. You do not want to be unfair, so you become unfair to yourself. And then one day, you realize you are no longer asking whether you are happy. You are only asking whether you can endure a little longer. There is a story I once heard about a woman who kept a lamp burning beside her window every night. Years earlier, someone she loved had promised to return, and the lamp became her way of saying, "You will still be able to find me." At first, lighting it felt like devotion. Later, it became routine. Years passed, the person never came back, but every evening she still cleaned the glass, trimmed the wick, and placed the lamp in the window. She believed she was preserving hope. What she did not realize was that she had arranged her entire life around an absence. One night, the lamp finally went out. She searched for another candle, then stopped. For the first time, she looked beyond the window and noticed the rest of her house was dark. She had spent so long keeping one light alive for someone who was gone that she had forgotten to illuminate the rooms where she still lived. I think there is a lamp like that inside you. Perhaps it belongs to a person. Perhaps it belongs to an old dream, a family expectation, or the belief that if you remain patient enough, someone will eventually recognize what they have in you. You keep a part of yourself available. You revisit old words. You remember rare moments of tenderness. You imagine the conversation in which everything is finally explained. You do not always admit that you are waiting, because waiting sounds passive and you have continued living. But emotionally, one window remains lit. I need to tell you something you may not have allowed yourself to consider. Keeping that light alive has required energy. More energy than you realize. It has shaped the way you enter new relationships. It has influenced what you tolerate. It has made you compare present possibilities with unfinished memories. It may even be why genuine peace sometimes feels empty, because your nervous system became accustomed to waiting, decoding, and hoping. When confusion lasts long enough, clarity can feel strangely unfamiliar. That is one of the cruelest paradoxes of emotional uncertainty. You say you want peace, but when peace arrives, part of you searches it for hidden danger. You say you want consistent love, but consistency may initially feel less intense than the connection that kept you constantly guessing. Intensity and intimacy can feel similar from the inside. Both can make someone occupy your thoughts. Both can create powerful longing. Both can make ordinary moments feel charged with meaning. But intimacy allows you to rest. Intensity keeps you monitoring. Intimacy says, you can be fully present here. Intensity says, pay attention or this may disappear. I don't think you have always been missing the person. Sometimes you have been missing the relief you believed their return would give you. You imagined that if they finally chose you clearly, apologized sincerely, or explained why they changed, the uncertainty would release you. But that gave someone else authority over your peace. It made their understanding feel necessary for your healing, and perhaps that is why this message feels strangely personal. It is touching the part of you that has grown tired of waiting for another person to provide the ending. You may not have said that aloud yet. You may still love them. You may still wish things had been different. You may still look at old memories and wonder whether the connection was real. Something can be real and still be unable to remain. Something can matter deeply and still not be healthy enough to build a life around. Someone can care about you and still lack the courage, honesty, or emotional capacity to care for you well. This is difficult to accept because it removes the comforting simplicity of heroes and villains. Perhaps no one was entirely cruel. Perhaps there was no dramatic betrayal you could point to. Perhaps there were only repeated moments in which you needed someone to meet you emotionally, and they could not or would not stay there. So you kept lowering the definition of connection. A little attention became affection. A brief return became commitment. Potential became evidence. And surviving the uncertainty became proof that the bond must be special. I see this in you. You can endure almost anything when you believe it has meaning. But endurance does not always reveal meaning. Sometimes it only reveals how long you were willing to remain loyal to hope. That realization is not meant to shame you. It is meant to help you see yourself accurately. You stayed because you cared. You waited because something mattered. You tried to understand because walking away without answers felt like betraying the sincerity of what you had felt. There is dignity in that. But dignity is not only found in staying. Sometimes dignity returns in the moment you stop asking an unanswered question to become your home. Maybe this message arrived while you were approaching that moment, not fully ready to let go, not willing to continue in quite the same way. You are standing between two identities, the person who kept believing and the person who has begun to notice what that belief has cost. That space can feel lonely because nothing has been decided yet. The old story no longer fits, but the new one has not become clear. You cannot return to who you were before you knew what you know, yet you are still learning how to live differently. That is not failure, that is recognition. It is the quiet moment when you finally see the dark rooms behind the lamp. When you realize your life has been asking for your presence too. When you understand that the ache is not proof that you should keep waiting. Sometimes the ache is the part of you that is ready to come home. And perhaps the perfect time is not when you feel strongest. Perhaps it is the first honest moment in which you are tired of disappearing from your own life. Coming home to yourself does not always feel like relief at first. Sometimes it feels like guilt. The moment you stop arranging your emotional life around someone else's absence, you may begin questioning whether you have become cold. When you no longer answer immediately, explain endlessly, or rush to repair every uncomfortable silence, a familiar anxiety appears. What if I am giving up too soon? What if they finally change after I leave? What if I misunderstood them? But I think the question beneath all those questions is more vulnerable. What if choosing myself causes me to lose the connection completely? That fear explains more of your behavior than you may realize. You are not simply holding on to a person. You are holding on to the possibility that your patience would eventually be rewarded. If you stayed calm enough, loved carefully enough, and proved that you were different from everyone who had left them, perhaps they would finally feel safe enough to love you openly. It gave your pain a purpose, and pain becomes much harder to release when we have turned it into an investment. I noticed something about you. You rarely walk away because of one painful moment. You leave only after accumulating so many private disappointments that staying begins to require you to deny what you already know. Even then, you do not leave angrily. You leave in pieces. First, you stop sharing the small details of your day because you have learned they will not be received with much interest. Then you stop explaining what hurt because the conversation always returns to your reaction instead of their behavior. Eventually, you stop imagining the future with the same certainty. From the outside, nothing may appear to have changed. Inside, you are quietly removing your belongings from a place no one else can see. Yet, when the final separation comes, you still grieve as though it surprised you. That is because your mind had been preparing to leave while your heart was still negotiating. The heart does not measure a relationship only by what happened. It also measures it by what was promised, implied, imagined, and almost possible. You do not grieve only the person you had. You grieve the person they occasionally became, the one who appeared in rare, beautiful moments and made you believe everything difficult was temporary. You grieve the future that existed only in conversations. You grieve the version of yourself who felt certain at the beginning. And perhaps most painfully, you grieve the meaning you gave to your endurance. If the relationship was not going where you believed it was going, then what were all those difficult nights for? This is where people often misunderstand attachment. They assume we remain connected because someone consistently makes us happy. But sometimes we remain connected because the relationship repeatedly moves us between hope and disappointment. That movement creates its own emotional gravity. A little warmth after a period of distance can feel more powerful than steady affection, not because it contains more love, but because it contains relief. Relief is intoxicating when you have been emotionally holding your breath. Think about those moments when someone finally replied after being distant. Your body relaxed before you even read their words. The problem had not necessarily been solved. The pattern had not changed. But contact had returned, and for a moment the fear of losing them disappeared. That brief relief taught you to keep waiting. It taught you that discomfort might be followed by closeness. It made uncertainty feel like the price of connection. Eventually, you became more attached to the cycle because each return seemed to prove that your hope had not been foolish. I think you have felt this too. The person who gave you the least consistency may have occupied the most space in your mind. That is not evidence that they were your deepest love. Sometimes it is evidence that your nervous system never received a clear ending. A settled connection becomes part of your life. An uncertain connection can become a problem your mind keeps trying to solve. That is why you replay conversations. You search for the moment the tone changed. You wonder whether you asked for too much, spoke too honestly, or failed to notice some hidden warning. The mind dislikes unfinished patterns, so it keeps returning to the same emotional scene, hoping that one more examination will produce certainty. But there are situations in which no amount of analysis will create a satisfying answer, not because you are incapable of understanding them, because the other person's behavior did not come from one consistent truth. They may have wanted closeness and feared it at the same time. They may have enjoyed being understood, but resisted the responsibility of understanding you. They may have meant what they said in one moment and lacked the emotional stability to honor it in another. You were searching for a single explanation inside someone who was living through contradictions of their own. Their confusion became your puzzle. And because you are thoughtful, you assumed that if you could understand the puzzle, you could stop it from hurting you. But understanding a pattern does not obligate you to remain inside it. That distinction matters. You can recognize why someone withdraws without accepting emotional abandonment. You can have compassion for their history without offering your future as a place where they avoid healing. You can understand that they were wounded and still admit that their wounds created wounds in you. Empathy explains behavior. It does not erase consequences. There is an old image of two people standing on opposite sides of a frozen river. One keeps calling, "Come closer, I need you here." The other takes one careful step onto the ice. A crack appears. "Keep coming," the first person says. "I promise it will hold." So the other person steps again. Another crack forms. The person on the shore becomes impatient. "Why are you moving so slowly? Don't you trust me?" But trust was never the real problem. The ice was. For a long time, you may have judged yourself for being cautious in a connection that repeatedly gave you reasons to feel unsafe. You thought trust meant ignoring the cracks. You believed love required you to keep moving because someone on the other side wanted proof of your faith. Yet emotional safety is not created by demanding trust. It is created by becoming trustworthy. Words can invite you onto the ice, but only consistency proves it can carry your weight. This may explain why you became someone you hardly recognized. Perhaps you checked for changes in tone. You noticed when messages became shorter. You felt unsettled by pauses that other people would have ignored. You rehearsed how to express a need without sounding demanding. You may have called yourself anxious, but anxiety does not always originate inside the person who feels it. Sometimes it is a reasonable response to an environment where affection is unpredictable. A secure connection does not require perfection. People become tired, distracted, afraid, and occasionally unavailable. The difference is that safety allows repair. You can name what happened without being punished for noticing it. You can ask for clarity without being treated like the problem. You can have an emotional need without being made to feel ashamed of possessing one. In a safe connection, conflict does not threaten your entire place in someone's life. That is what you were looking for. Not constant attention, not control, not a person who could read your mind. You wanted to know that honesty would not cost you love. But somewhere along the way, you learned to associate being loved with being manageable. You became good at anticipating other people's moods, reducing tension, and adjusting your needs to the emotional space available. Maybe this began long before the person you were thinking about. Perhaps you grew up in a home where peace depended on one person's mood. You learned to listen to footsteps, doors, and changes in voice. You learned when to speak and when to disappear. You became observant because observation helped you remain safe. Or perhaps love was present but inconsistent. You were praised when you performed well, helped others, stayed pleasant, or caused no difficulty. You began to believe that belonging was something you maintained through usefulness. So you became dependable. The person who remembers, the person who forgives, the person others call when their lives collapse. And because being needed felt close to being loved, you did not always notice when relationships relied on your care without truly caring for you. I need to tell you something. Usefulness can create connection, but it cannot guarantee intimacy. Someone may value what you provide and still fail to see who you are. They may love your patience because it protects them from consequences. They may praise your strength because it means they do not have to support you. They may call you understanding because you have learned not to ask them for what they ask from you. Then, when you finally establish a boundary, they say you have changed. They are right. You have changed from a version of yourself that made their comfort more important than your emotional truth. That does not make the new version cruel. It makes her visible. And visibility can feel frightening when you have spent years earning connection by adapting. If you say what you really need, you risk discovering who cannot meet you there. If you stop initiating, you may learn which relationships survive only because of your effort. If you no longer translate someone's silence into excuses, you may have to accept what their absence has already been saying. Clarity can carry grief. That is why people sometimes remain confused longer than necessary. Confusion preserves possibility. As long as nothing is fully named, the story can still become what you hoped. But the price of preserving possibility is remaining unavailable to reality. Reality may be less romantic, but it is kinder to your identity. It tells you that another person's inconsistency was not a measurement of your worth. Their inability to choose clearly did not mean you were difficult to choose. Their silence was not proof that your voice was unimportant. Their emotional distance did not reveal some hidden defect in you. It revealed the limits of what they were able or willing to offer. You took those limits personally because the rejection touched an older fear. The fear that if someone saw all of you, the tenderness, the need, the complicated memories, the days when you were not strong, they would eventually decide you were too much. So you tried to become less expressive, less expectant, less affected. But you were never too much. You were asking the wrong environment to hold the full weight of you. A small container does not prove that the ocean is excessive. I realized something recently. Healing often begins when you stop using another person's capacity as a mirror. Some people can meet you only at the depth where they have met themselves. When the conversation approaches honesty they have avoided, they retreat. When love requires accountability, they call the relationship complicated. When your needs reveal what they are not giving, they describe those needs as pressure. That response belongs to their inner world. You do not have to carry it as your identity. You may still feel the old fear when you speak honestly. Your heart may still race when you set a boundary. You may still want to send another message, soften your words, or make sure they are not upset with you. That does not mean the boundary is wrong. It means the old version of you is frightened that self-respect will lead to abandonment. Let that frightened part speak. Listen without allowing it to lead. It learned that connection had to be protected at any cost. It does not yet understand that a connection requiring your disappearance has already abandoned something essential. You, the real you. The one beneath all the adaptation. The one who does not want to decode affection. The one who wants to laugh without wondering when the warmth will change. The one who is tired of proving she is worthy of a place that should have been offered freely. Perhaps loneliness has never simply been the absence of people. Perhaps it has been the absence of somewhere you could exist without performing for love. And perhaps coming home means becoming that place for yourself, not as a substitute for human connection, but as the beginning of choosing connections where you no longer have to leave yourself outside the door. You have stood outside that door for longer than you realize. Not literally, of course. You have entered rooms, joined conversations, built relationships, and allowed people to come close. But some essential part of you remained at the entrance, waiting to find out which version of you would be welcome. The strong version usually entered first. She knew how to listen without interrupting. She knew how to remain calm when someone else became emotional. She could carry disappointment without making the room uncomfortable. She could smile through uncertainty and say, "I understand," even when what she really meant was, "This is hurting me." People admired that version of you. They called her mature, independent, patient, and resilient. But I don't think they always understood what they were praising. Sometimes people praise your strength, because they benefit from never having to witness your needs. And sometimes you accept that praise because it makes your loneliness feel meaningful. If you can call yourself strong, then perhaps the nights you endured alone were not abandonment. Perhaps they were evidence of character. If you can call yourself independent, then perhaps nobody failed to show up for you. If you can say you need very little, then you never have to confront how much it hurt when even that little was not given. Strength became more than a quality. It became a hiding place. I need to tell you something that may challenge the story you have carried about yourself. You were not always strong because you wanted to be. Sometimes you were strong because no one came when you were vulnerable. There is a difference. Chosen strength expands you. Forced strength contains you. Chosen strength says, I can face this. Forced strength whispers, I have no other option. You became capable because life required capability. You learned how to calm yourself, solve your own problems, and keep functioning when your inner world felt unstable. Eventually, people stopped asking whether you needed help because you made survival look natural. Then something subtle happened. You began expecting others to disappoint you while secretly hoping one person would prove you wrong. That hope made certain connections feel unusually powerful. When someone noticed a hidden part of you, remembered a detail, or offered tenderness without being asked, it reached far deeper than the moment itself. It touched the part of you that had been waiting to be cared for without first earning it. This is why you may have attached meaning to gestures other people considered small. A gentle question, a long conversation late at night, someone saying, you don't have to be strong with me. Those moments felt like openings. You thought perhaps that you had finally found a person who could see beyond your competence. But being seen once is not the same as being held consistently. Some people are skilled at entering emotional rooms they do not know how to remain inside. They can create intimacy in a moment, reveal something private, listen with unusual attention, and make you feel chosen. Yet when that intimacy begins asking for consistency, they step away. You are left wondering whether you imagined the connection. You did not imagine it, but you may have mistaken someone's capacity for a meaningful moment, for their capacity to build a meaningful relationship. Those are different capacities. A person can be sincere and still be unreliable. They can feel deeply and still behave carelessly. They can recognize your value and still fail to honor it. That truth is difficult because it removes the explanation that would be easiest to survive. If they never cared, then perhaps you could dismiss everything. If it was all false, you could close the door with anger. But life is rarely that clean. Sometimes someone genuinely cares for you within the limits of who they are. The problem is that their limits still hurt you. You kept focusing on the care because admitting the limits felt like giving up on something real. Yet love is not measured only by what someone feels. It is also measured by what their feelings enable them to protect, communicate, repair, and sustain. Private emotion does not automatically become relational safety. Someone may miss you and still not contact you. They may fear losing you and still refuse to change. They may regret hurting you and still avoid accountability. Their internal feelings may be genuine, but you cannot build a secure life inside another person's unexpressed intentions. You live with their behavior. That is the deeper truth you may have been resisting. You were not asking whether they loved you. You were asking whether their love could become a place where you were safe. And perhaps the answer was not the one you wanted. That answer does not erase what you shared. It simply stops memory from rewriting the evidence. Memory is tender with what we miss. It preserves the warm evenings and softens the long periods of uncertainty around them. It returns to the words that made us feel chosen and forgets how often we had to survive without their proof. The mind does this because grief searches for relief. It turns fragments into a complete picture. But nostalgia is not always an accurate historian. Sometimes it is a curator that displays only the beautiful artifacts while keeping the ruins in storage. I think you have visited that private museum many times. You walk through old messages. You replay the conversation in which they sounded certain. You remember the way their presence changed an ordinary day. For a few minutes, the past feels close enough to touch. Then you leave carrying the same unanswered question. If it felt that real, why could it not last? Perhaps it was real. Perhaps it was also incomplete. A seed is real, but it is not yet a tree. It contains possibility, but possibility cannot provide shade. You were trying to rest beneath something that never fully grew. There was once a violin maker who spent years searching for a rare piece of wood. He believed it would produce a sound unlike any instrument he had made before. When he finally found it, the grain was beautiful, the weight was perfect, and even a light touch seemed to awaken a hidden resonance. He took it home and began his work, but as he carved, he discovered a fracture deep inside the wood. It was not visible from the surface. He tried to work around it, change the design, reinforce the fragile places, and spent months protecting the piece from pressure. Each time he tightened the strings, the fracture widened. Still, he could not abandon it. He had searched too long. He had imagined the finished instrument too clearly. He believed enough skill and patience could save what the wood itself could not sustain. One evening, the body split. The maker sat beside it until morning, grieving not only the wood but the music he had already heard in his mind. His apprentice found him there and asked, "Was the music never real?" The maker looked at the broken instrument and said, "The music was real in me. I mistook that for proof that this could carry it. I see something of you in that maker. You heard music in a connection. You felt what it could become. You brought patience, imagination, forgiveness, and emotional skill. When fractures appeared, you adjusted yourself around them. You asked for less pressure. You changed the shape of your expectations. You worked carefully around every fragile place. And because the music inside you was so vivid, you believed the relationship itself must contain the same promise. But perhaps much of what was beautiful came from what you brought. Your depth, your loyalty, your ability to find meaning, your willingness to see the unfinished parts of another person and imagine who they might become. This does not mean the connection contained nothing. It means you may have attributed your own capacity for love to the person receiving it. You thought they were extraordinary because of how deeply you could feel beside them. But what if that depth was yours? What if the devotion you admired was your devotion? What if the tenderness you are afraid you will never experience again did not disappear with them because it was never theirs to take? That realization changes the meaning of loss. You did not lose your only chance to feel deeply. You discovered how deeply you are capable of feeling. The person may have awakened that capacity, but they did not create it. It belongs to you. And this is where identity begins to shift. For a long time, you may have believed that being chosen would prove your worth. If a particular person finally recognized you, stayed, or returned with certainty, their decision would confirm that you had not been foolish to hope. But your worth cannot safely depend on the verdict of someone whose own fears determine what they can recognize. A person standing in darkness may fail to see a painting. That does not diminish the painting. It only describes the light in the room. You have spent too much time trying to become more visible to people committed to looking away. You explained yourself more clearly, loved more patiently, and waited for the moment your value would become undeniable. But value and recognition are not the same thing. Something can be precious and still be mishandled. Something can be rare and still be overlooked. Someone can lose you without fully understanding what they lost. Their failure to recognize you is not a final judgment. It is an incomplete perception. I don't think you have noticed how often you placed yourself on trial. Every unanswered message became evidence. Every emotional withdrawal became a witness. You examined your personality, your appearance, your timing, your needs, and your mistakes, trying to determine why you were not enough to make someone stay consistently. You built a case against yourself using evidence produced by another person's limitations. Then you called the verdict truth. It was never truth. It was pain trying to create an explanation. Self-blame can feel strangely comforting because it gives you an illusion of control. If you caused the distance, perhaps you can become better and prevent it. If you were too emotional, you can become quieter. If you expected too much, you can expect less. If you loved incorrectly, you can perfect the way you love. But if the problem was their capacity, avoidance, or unwillingness, then you must face something harder. You could not have loved them into readiness. That is the truth your heart has been circling. Not every loss could have been prevented by a better version of you. Some endings were not punishments for your imperfections. They were revelations of incompatibility, emotional limitation, or timing that effort alone could not repair. Acceptance begins when you stop rewriting yourself to make an uncontrollable outcome feel controllable. You did not fail because another person could not meet you. You did not ask for too much because honesty made them uncomfortable. You did not destroy the connection by naming what the connection was doing to you. The truth did not create the fracture, it revealed it. And the part of you that still wishes you had remained silent is not asking for love. It is asking to return to the brief period when you could still pretend the music would be enough to hold everything together. But you are no longer standing beside the broken instrument. You are beginning to understand where the music truly came from. It came from you. Once you understand that the music came from you, something begins to loosen, not all at once. You may still remember them when the room becomes quiet. You may still feel tenderness for what happened, anger for what did not happen, and grief for everything that almost became real. Healing does not demand that you erase those feelings. It asks you to stop treating them as instructions. Missing someone does not instruct you to return. Loving someone does not instruct you to abandon yourself. Remembering the beautiful moments does not instruct you to deny the painful ones. A feeling is real, but it is not always a direction. I need to tell you something about transformation. It rarely begins with confidence. More often, it begins with exhaustion. You become too tired to keep negotiating against your own truth. You stop checking whether someone has changed because you notice how much the checking changes you. You stop rehearsing the perfect explanation because you realize the person who benefits from misunderstanding you may never consider your words sufficient. You stop waiting for closure to arrive in another person's voice. You begin creating it through your own decisions. At first, those decisions may feel small. You do not reread the old conversation tonight. You resist the urge to check whether they noticed your absence. You allow a message to remain unanswered until you know what you genuinely want to say. You stop offering immediate access to someone who has repeatedly treated your presence as optional. Nothing dramatic happens. There is no music swelling in the background. No sudden moment in which every feeling disappears. There is simply one evening when you protect your peace instead of interrupting it. Then another, and another. This is how you return to yourself, not through one heroic choice, but through many quiet moments in which you stop leaving yourself behind. You may have imagined healing as becoming someone who no longer cares. But indifference is not the goal. Freedom is. Freedom means you can remember without being pulled backward. You can acknowledge what mattered without making it responsible for your future. You can wish someone well without reopening the door through which your peace kept escaping. You do not have to turn love into hatred to release it. You only have to stop confusing love with permission. You can love someone and deny them access to the parts of you they repeatedly mishandled. You can forgive someone and still require distance. You can understand their wounds and refuse to keep becoming one of them. This is not punishment. A boundary is not revenge, written politely. It is a truthful description of where you can remain emotionally whole. I see this in you. You have spent so long considering how your choices affect everyone else that you sometimes feel selfish when you finally include yourself in the calculation. Before saying no, you imagine their disappointment. Before leaving, you imagine their loneliness. Before speaking honestly, you predict their discomfort. But when did you begin believing that protecting other people from discomfort was more important than protecting yourself from repeated pain? Perhaps you were taught that goodness meant endless availability. Perhaps you saw love modeled as sacrifice without limits. Perhaps the people around you praised forgiveness, but rarely spoke about accountability. So you learned to give one more chance, then another. Eventually, chances became a way of postponing the truth. There is nothing noble about offering unlimited access to someone who uses every opportunity to repeat the same injury. Forgiveness can soften what you carry, but it cannot perform another person's transformation for them. Real change has evidence. It does not arrive only as an apology spoken when consequences become uncomfortable. It appears in repeated behavior, especially after the emotional intensity of reconciliation has passed. It respects the boundary without trying to make you feel guilty for needing it. It accepts responsibility without turning the conversation toward its own shame. It understands that trust cannot be demanded back merely because regret has been expressed. Trust returns slowly, through experiences that contradict the original wound. And if those experiences never come, you are allowed to believe the pattern. You do not have to keep sacrificing reality to protect someone's potential. This will change the way you recognize connection. You may once have been drawn most powerfully to people who felt mysterious, emotionally complex, or difficult to reach. Their distance created questions, and your mind translated those questions into depth. But mystery is not always depth. Sometimes it is simply a lack of information. Someone being difficult to understand does not make them profound. Someone making you work for closeness does not make that closeness valuable. Someone awakening your fear of loss does not mean they are destined to remain. The right connection may feel quieter than what you have known. At first, that quiet may confuse you. You may wonder where the intense anticipation has gone. You may look for the unpredictable shift, the sudden withdrawal, the moment you are expected to prove your worth. But emotional safety does not keep you auditioning. It lets you arrive. Imagine entering a house where you have always been welcome. You do not stand at the door rehearsing what to say. You do not study every expression before taking off your coat. You do not wonder whether occupying space will become an inconvenience. You breathe differently because your body understands that it does not need to earn the chair beneath it. That is what secure love resembles. Not constant excitement, not perfect agreement, not uninterrupted closeness. It is the quiet knowledge that difficulty can be addressed without affection becoming a weapon. It is being able to say, "That hurt me," and hearing curiosity rather than contempt. It is not having to become ill, distant, or completely overwhelmed before your needs are taken seriously. It is the freedom to be a person instead of a performance. There was a gardener who inherited a field that had been neglected for years. The soil was dry, and almost nothing grew except one vine wrapped tightly around a dead tree. The vine was beautiful in spring. Its flowers covered the gray branches, making the tree appear alive from a distance. The gardener became attached to it and spent months watering its roots. But the vine never spread into the field. It used all its strength climbing the dead tree. An older gardener visited and said, "If you want the field to live, you will have to cut it back." The gardener refused. The vine was the only beautiful thing she could see. Then a storm came. The dead tree fell, taking the vine with it. As she cleared the broken branches, she discovered the ground beneath them had been hidden from sunlight for years. She cut the surviving vine away, planted part of it beside a strong trellis, and began tending the open soil. The following spring, flowers appeared across the field. She had believed cutting the vine would destroy the only beauty she possessed. In reality, she was releasing beauty from a structure that could no longer support it. Perhaps you have been that vine. Your love was alive, your hope was alive, your ability to nurture connection was alive. But you wrapped those living parts around something unavailable and mistook your effort for proof that the structure was strong. When it began collapsing, you feared you would collapse with it. You did not. The love survived because the capacity to love was yours. Now it requires a different place to grow. That place begins inside the life you have neglected while waiting. Look at what may still be there. The interests you stopped making time for. The friend you miss, but kept telling yourself you would call later. The room you wanted to change. The morning routine that once made you feel grounded. The version of your future that did not depend on someone finally becoming ready. Transformation is not merely walking away from what hurt you. It is redirecting your energy toward what can live. This includes your relationship with yourself, but not in the shallow sense of repeating flattering words you do not yet believe. Self-trust is built through evidence, too. You build it each time you listen when something feels wrong. Each time you keep a promise you made privately. Each time you choose the difficult truth over the comforting fantasy. Each time you stop asking someone else to confirm what their behavior has already shown you. Eventually, your inner voice becomes familiar again. You recognize the difference between fear and intuition. Fear speaks urgently. It tells you to act now or lose everything. It imagines rejection before anything has happened. Intuition is quieter. It repeats itself without panic. It does not demand an immediate response. It simply says, "This does not feel like a place where I can remain whole." You used to silence that voice because you wanted the story to work. Now you can honor it without making anyone a villain. That is a form of peace. Peace does not require a perfect explanation. It does not require the other person to agree with your interpretation. It does not need everyone to understand why you chose differently. Sometimes peace is knowing that you cannot keep proving your pain to someone committed to debating it. Sometimes peace is allowing your final answer to be the life you build after the conversation ends. You may worry that protecting yourself will make you guarded forever, but a boundary is not a wall around your heart. It is a door with a lock, and you are finally keeping the key. A wall allows no one to enter. A boundary asks those who enter to respect the home. You will still love. You will still take emotional risks. You will still encounter uncertainty, because no human connection comes with guarantees. But you will no longer measure love by how much uncertainty you can survive. You will measure it by honesty, reciprocity, repair, and the freedom to remain yourself. And when someone cannot offer those things, you will not use their absence as proof that you are unworthy. You will recognize incompatibility before turning it into self-rejection. You will let behavior answer questions that words have kept open. You will remember that being chosen means very little if the price is betraying yourself. I don't think you have noticed this yet, but the person who began listening to this message is already changing. She was searching for a reason the message arrived. She thought perhaps it would explain another person. Instead, it has been returning her attention to herself. Not because the other person never mattered, because she matters too, and perhaps that is the acceptance you have been approaching. You do not need to deny your past to choose your future. You can carry the wisdom without carrying the waiting. You can keep the tenderness without keeping the wound open. You can allow the lamp in the window to go dark, not because love failed, because morning has arrived, and you no longer need a light meant for someone who is not coming home. Maybe this message did arrive at the perfect time. Not at the moment when you had all the answers, but at the moment when you became willing to stop living inside the question. You were never foolish for loving deeply. You were never weak for hoping. You were never difficult to love because someone gave you uncertainty instead of safety. You were learning. You were discovering that your heart can be open without being unprotected, that compassion does not require self-abandonment, and that an ending can be painful without being a mistake. Let this be the moment you stop waiting for another person to return what you have always carried within you. Your tenderness is still here. Your dignity is still here. Your ability to trust, connect, and begin again is still here. Nothing essential was taken from you. The dark rooms are waiting for your light. The field is waiting for new life. The music is waiting for a place strong enough to carry it. And you do not have to rush, just breathe. Let the truth settle gently. You are not standing at the end of love. You are standing at the beginning of no longer abandoning yourself to receive it.